Live from Liverpool, The Dark Paranormal, Season 17. Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 4 of The Dark Paranormal, Season 17. As ever, thank you for all of your correspondence during the last week, and of course, if you did, I hope you managed to go back and listen to Season 12, Episode 4, The Dark Arts, and also Season 15, Episode 3, The Dark Arts Part 2, because today we will conclude the story of Kinar, a journey which has turned out to be one of the most compelling experiences we've ever covered to date. And this one, of course, spans 6 seasons. But don't worry if you did not get a chance to listen to those episodes, because I will give a slight recap on those episodes before we go into today's experience. Also, of course, we've now entered October, the month where the rest of the world, especially in the podcast community, focus on the paranormal, whereas we do so every week. So, from next week, we will have our 2 minisodes per week. Our first one will be a new listener experience, and every additional new minisode, which will be released on a Monday, will be a more famous case. So we have a good October to look forward to, but we also have a lot to get through today. So let me begin by thanking our wonderful team over at Patreon. Now, when you join our Patreon team, not only do you receive everything on this feed, that's debuts, finales, minisodes, main episodes, etc., ad-free and before everyone else, you can also receive exclusive access to the Patreon-only podcast, Dark Bites. As you no doubt know by now, on Dark Bites, we take an informal look at some of the shorter experiences that we receive each week. And for me, some of those experiences are truly unbelievable, yet the most believable things that we receive. There's a certain thing about the brevity of a shorter experience that makes it all the more believable for me, and definitely gives us all more jump-off points to go and investigate. And our community on Patreon most definitely do that. And that's the best thing about our Patreon for me, that community. We've built a wonderful safe space of like-minded paranormal enthusiasts just like you, and we'd love to extend an exclusive invitation for you to join our community. Head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal. Just like the following wonderful new team members have: Alex Talley, Casey Sims, Ashton DeLoach, Crystal Micken, Paul Kendrick, Ryan Roberts, Danny Bird, Christina Garlic-Aoli, Tammy Harding, Kit Von QT, Sabumafu, Caroline Morris, Emily Leeson, Lonely Ginger, Bri Taff, Samantha Sales, Mallory Picoul, Louise Pete, Charlie Murphy, Jesse DeMary, Kendall Owens, Erin Ramirez, Christine Erickson, October Sharifi, Claire Roberts, Lee Crumpton, Nicole Rakovich, Carrie V, and Alyssa Cody Garcia. Thank you so much for supporting the show, guys. It genuinely means the world to me. And I hope you enjoy all the early ad-free releases and, of course, the Dark Bites episodes, which are released every Sunday without fail, even on the downtime between seasons, and, of course, the back catalogue of Dark Bites, which I think comes in just around 70 hours worth of Patreon-only content that you can listen to at your leisure, or, of course, you could spend every day of October like it's Halloween itself. So, if that sounds like your cup of tea, so to speak, head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal and join what I think is the best paranormal online community out there. But right now, it's time to lower those lights, make yourself comfortable, and of course, leave your disbelief at the door, whilst we all gain some closure by listening to the concluding section of Kinar's paranormal experience. This is Dark Arts, The Final Rite. Hi Kevin, this is Kinar once again. I've shared 2 previous posts with you, and now this, the final part, of what has been a long, traumatic, yet fulfilling journey. I'm the type of person who cannot let things lie. I look for conclusions, the final, definitive answer. And it's that made me go back to India with great determination to conclude this story. There had to be a conclusion. Otherwise, as hard as I might try, I know I will never let it rest. In part 2 of my story, some of these paragraphs were omitted. I'd very much appreciate it if you could read them out. I make this request as it was my trip to Varanasi that has given me the strength, courage, and most importantly, the determination to end my journey. It's Kev speaking now, and just to bring everyone up to speed, in Kinar's first submission, Kinar, a Hindu man of Indian heritage, lost his father as a young boy, and due to financial constraints, his father's ashes were sent with someone else's to be scattered in the river Ganges. Years later, at age 15, Kinar began to experience terrifying recurring dreams of a woman in a red sari, who would lure him with promises of meeting his father, but would only lead him to fear and despair. Upon confiding in his mother, they consulted a priest, who suggested that his father's soul may be restless due to an incomplete final rite, and advised Kinar to travel to Chanod in India to perform the necessary ritual. During the rituals that followed, Kinar encountered unsettling supernatural phenomena. He heard voices. He received a mysterious pouch from an old woman, allegedly for protection. But following this, he was plagued by frightening events, apparitions, whispers, and even physical harm. Realizing the pouch was linked to some dark art, he returned to the priest, who helped him dispose of it through further rituals. After completing the proper ceremonies, the haunting ceased, and Kinar, reflecting on his experiences, hoped the mysterious woman never returned. Then Kinar got back in touch. In his follow-up, Kinar sought closure by delving into his family's past, and he discovered that this apparition, this lady in the red sari, has appeared to several male family members across the generations. So determined to uncover the truth, Kinar travelled to his ancestral village in Rajasthan, India, where he connects with his cousin Amar and an elder named Dadaji. Now, despite warnings, he becomes obsessed with an abandoned ancestral house and experienced unsettling supernatural events, including hearing the sound of payal, or the jingling anklets often worn by women in India. He also felt compelled to renovate and live in the abandoned house. His behaviour grew increasingly erratic until Dadaji revealed a long-kept family secret. It turned out in 1774, Kinar's ancestor's young wife committed sati. Sati is an old Indian practice where the wife of a deceased husband would wear her dark pink, almost red, wedding dress and throw themselves onto the burning funeral pyre of their husband. Although no longer practiced and outlawed, it was meant to be some sort of gesture from the wife to voluntarily jump on the fire and die herself along with her husband to signify their bond in this life and the next. Although how voluntary this act was for the distant relative of Kinar is impossible to know. At the end of Kinar's revelatory second submission, it's implied that the restless spirit is in fact the woman in the red sari, haunting male descendants of the family. And it's in that room with Kinar, his cousin Amar, and the elder Dadaji staring at the family tree that we begin the final rite and conclude Kinar's experience. And each word from this point is back to Kinar. Staring at the family tree, Dadaji spoke. She's not related to you by blood, but she has your family name." Both Amar and I were shocked. We stared at the family tree and looked for her, but her name was not there. She does not exist in our family history. I felt numb, but I had to ask, is she the one who came to me in my dreams, and then in a real form? "I don't know," said Dadaji. I believed him. How can anyone know unless she reveals who she really is or was? Amar asked me if I was okay, and I was not. I had a whole mix of emotions, and I didn't know which one I was feeling the most. I asked Amar if he knew. He shook his head. I believed him. I sat down with both Dadaji and Amar and started sharing my dreams. Chanod, the hotel room experience. I was not sure exactly what was happening. Yes, this woman appeared in my dreams, tormenting me. I saw her in the corner of my eye when walking the streets during my last visit. I saw her in my hotel room. But the question I wanted to know is who actually caused those cuts to my arm? Who was whispering in my ears? Dadaji said he doesn't know. When you went to Chanod, you could have brought back spirits who are completely unconnected to the woman in red. He said I could go to 5 or 6 different priests, and they would all give 5 or 6 different explanations. So I said, basically, we'll never really know then. I'll never know who or what or why. There was silence, and Amar put his arm around me. I finished packing and said to Amar that we should go. There was no point in me hanging around here. Things were still up in the air. There were too many loose ends, especially that abandoned house. Dadaji had said that we should walk back into the house and place the pail we found back in the room. So we walked to the house, I went into the room, and I placed the pail on the floor. I immediately walked out, and I asked Dadaji, can we please demolish the house and maybe build a small memorial? He shook his head, saying it's better to leave the house as it is. He explained to destroy the house would be to drive out everything that resides there, and therefore it's better that the house remains. I touched Dadaji's feet as a mark of respect, and I gave him a big hug. He said there's always a place for me at his home, and I got into Amar's car and we drove away. On our way back, I looked at my phone and I deleted every single photo of my trip. I deleted all the notes I'd made, as well as the website links of places to visit. I wiped the whole trip clean. I didn't want to take anything back with me. I even purchased a new set of clothes. 2 t-shirts, undergarments, and a pair of jeans. I left all my clothes and my footwear in India. I left my suitcase, and I asked Amar to donate them. Before flying back, I made a trip to Varanasi, regarded as the spiritual capital of India, just to cleanse myself in the holy river, the Ganges. I stayed in a temple for 3 days, meditating and restoring my spiritual, mental, and physical well-being. During those 3 days, I built a shield around me, and I knew nothing could harm me. I have the black thread. I knew I will never be able to leave these experiences behind. They will always be a part of who I am, and I embraced them. Was I scared? No, not in the slightest. I was and still am proud of who I am, proud of my family, proud of its history. And if all of this is part of being in the family, then I'll have to accept it. And I have accepted it. However, being part of a family means you should make right all the things your forefathers did which were wrong. And what happened to that poor woman was wrong on so many different levels. I came back to the UK knowing that I will go back because things needed concluding. I'm fortunate enough to have my own business and fabulous and reliable staff that I trust. So leaving work was not going to be an issue. Over the next few months, I kept thinking about this woman. A woman, according to my family history, who does not exist. But she did, and she deserved her place. I flew back to India with Amar, and we headed back to Dadaji's. He was expecting me and told me in no uncertain terms that I am playing with fire and I should let things be. I had to tell him that these experiences are happening to me and I need answers. It took a lot of courage for me to speak up because he's my elder, but I had to. He was sad, but he said he'd support me. That night, we sat in the courtyard discussing what to do next. I had flown to India, but had no idea exactly what I had to do or should do. Should I go back to Chanod? Just the thought alone gave me chills. Or do I seek the solution here, where the old ruins are? Dadaji told me that going back and forth is not doing anyone any good, and I need to find the final solution. Maybe you should go back to Varanasi and seek out someone who could advise you, he said. This made sense, and I was happy to do that, as the place has an aura of calm, spirituality. Amar said he'd come with me, but would only be able to stay for a few days. Well, I was okay with that. So we left, and on a train we made our way to Varanasi. Varanasi is one of the oldest cities in the world, over 2,500 years old, and it sits on the banks of the holy river Ganges in northern India. It's the central place in the traditions of pilgrimage, death and mourning in the Hindu world. It's been dubbed as the City of Death by many. What better place to seek advice and support, I thought. We checked into a small hotel, and the next day we went to the Manikarnika Ghat, the oldest cremation site. This place is not for the faint-hearted. This is the place where the bodies are cremated on open funeral pyres. There are holy men and priests, as well as those who assist with cremations and others, including tourists and visitors, milling around. Amar said we should just ask here for a priest or a holy man to give us some advice. But many of those we asked said they'd do it for a price. Now, although we were willing to pay, their attitude did not sit well with me, and so every one of them was dismissed. On the second day, we went to a temple, and the priest there recommended a man who was well versed in the supernatural and dark arts. We were told that he would advise us. Well, my jaw dropped, because after Chanod, there was no way I was going anywhere near this man. So Amar said he'd go. Well, I went back to our hotel room and Amar went to see this man. A few hours later, Amar came back and said we need to go to a temple the next day to meet this man. He assured me that whilst the man is knowledgeable in the dark arts and rituals, he does not practice them. It was really difficult, and I had to draw all of my inner strength, but I agreed. So the next day, we went to the temple to meet this man. I won't give his name, nor will I give him an alias. This is out of a promise I made to him. So I will just call him the Man in White, or MIW. He was dressed in a long white shirt and loose pants. MIW was tall, lean, and in his 70s. He had long white hair and a beard and spoke very, very softly. He sat us down and I retold the whole story to him. Everything from Chanod to Payals. He listened and told us to come back the next day. Is that it? I thought. Come back for what? Amar took me by the arm and ushered me out. Just do as he says, he whispered in my ear. And in the same breath, he told me he was going back home, but I could contact him any time. Well, I knew he had to go, but I wished he'd stay. We went back to the hotel and Amar packed his bag and left. Great, I thought. Here I am on my own again. In the morning, I went to the temple to meet the MIW. He brought out some sort of astrology chart and asked for my date of birth and proceeded to write stuff and draw triangles and other shapes. I genuinely had no idea what he was doing, but when finished, he turned the page to me and started pointing at his scribbling. You attract them, he said. You draw them to you. Who? I asked. The spirits, he said. The good ones and the bad ones. I was stunned. I really didn't know what to say. He then started to explain that I will only find peace when these spirits, or a particular spirit, finds peace. He tried to give me an explanation about all the experiences I had. I welcomed the explanation, but what I really wanted to know is how do I make it stop? I really shouldn't have asked, as I knew what the answer would be. Rituals. Here we go again, I thought. And I bet he'll ask for an extortionate amount of money. I don't want money, he said. I don't want anything for me. If you want to give, then donate some money to pay for a funeral pyre for a family who can't afford one. At that moment, I was convinced this man does want to help, and he knows how to. He told me that we would need to carry out 3 rituals on 3 consecutive days. Each one would be challenging for me, as it will call the spirits. They may choose to reveal themselves, or they may stay silent. We have to make sure we carry out all 3 without interruption, he said. I asked if we were going to be, or I was going to be in any danger. He looked at me and said that as long as I did exactly what he told me to do, I'd be protected. But I was really scared. All my bravado went right out of the window, and for a brief moment, I wanted to say no and get the hell out of there. Get on a flight, go home, and never come back. But I didn't. MIW consulted his astrology chart and told me the day the rituals would start. It would be 2 days' time. I contacted Amar and relayed the plan to him. He apologized and said, I'm really sorry, but it's impossible for me to come. I was a bit deflated to hear this, but I also understood. On the day of the first ritual, I woke up really early. I went to bathe in the holy river, and I put on my traditional attire, a dhoti, which is a cotton wrap from the waist down, and a kurta, which is a loose white shirt. I went to the temple, and MIW took me to a room which was on the temple grounds, but not inside the temple. All the implements, spices, grains of rice, clarified butter, and many other things needed were laid out on the floor. He sat down, and I sat directly opposite him. He then asked a temple helper to close the door of the room we were in. Well, I was a bit scared and a bit apprehensive, to say the least. He lit a fire in a wide metal pot and told me that at his command, I was to put things in the fire, like a few grains of rice, the clarified butter, etc. He told me that if I see anything or I hear anything, I should ignore it. Just look at the fire and nothing else. He then started chanting, which started slowly and then picked up in pace. Every now and then he'd say, "Keep looking at the fire. Don't look anywhere else." Well, the fire was burning, and it was already over 30 degrees centigrade outside. But I felt a chill in the room coming from somewhere. As I stared into the fire, I felt someone put their hand on the back of my neck and gently squeeze it. A chill went down my spine and I looked up. MIW was staring just above my head. "Keep looking at the fire," he said. I dropped my gaze immediately. I was scared and I wanted to stop, but I knew I couldn't. He continued with the ritual, sometimes going into a trance, and sometimes shouting really loudly. Finally, he said I could look up. He shouted for the door to be opened to let in natural daylight. "Go back to your room and don't leave until tomorrow," he said. What just happened?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "We've just started." I didn't want to hang around, so I went back to my hotel room. I mentally prepped myself for the next day to be ready for anything. But I still couldn't get rid of that sensation of my neck being squeezed, even gently. I tried sleeping, but I could not, so I started watching a movie. About an hour into the movie, the TV and the lights start to flicker, followed by the lights being switched on and off. The TV was okay, but the lights were in a constant on-off mode. I thought, this must be the electricity playing up, but then the TV turned off, and in that silence there was a rustling sound from under my bed. I was now freaking out, and as always, I froze. I couldn't move. I was absolutely terrified. The light went off, and in the silence of my room, I heard what I can only describe as someone tapping the TV with their fingernails. I couldn't see anyone, but that sound was coming from the area where the TV was. And then, silence. And the memories of my experience in Varodra came back. I really questioned my sanity at this point. Why the fuck was I putting myself through all this? The tapping stopped, and all of a sudden, the clock radio on the side of the bed flew across the room and smashed into the wall opposite, and the room lights came back on but were flickering. I remember starting to freak out, and the room next door complained to the hotel staff. They came up to check. They looked at me, then at the smashed clock on the floor, and back at me. I knew it wasn't worth arguing, so I apologized. I said I'd pay for it, and then I went downstairs with the hotel staff, and I sat in the lobby. Varodra was happening all over again. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns make it easy to start automatically saving and investing for you, for your kids, your retirement. You're probably thinking, I need surplus money to invest, but you don't need a lot of money nor expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. And right now, Acorns is putting their money into your future. open an Acorns Later IRA and get up to a 3% match on new contributions. That's extra money for your retirement. If you're anything like me, you always thought investing's what other people do. Other people who know what they're doing. Well, that's where Acorns come in. They do know what they're doing on your behalf. And they're also putting their money where their mouth is because, as mentioned earlier, open an Acorns Later IRA and you'll get up to a 3% match on new contributions. So head to acorns.com/Dark Paranormal or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client testimonial. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Investing involves risk. Acorn Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorn.com/Dark Paranormal. The next day, the same routine. Bathe in the river, get dressed, go to temple. In a room with the door closed. This time he had another priest with him. He explained that this part of the ritual may need the power of 2 priests. And he was here to make sure we could complete the ritual. This particular ritual is to challenge the spirits. We needed to do this to understand what the third ritual would entail in order for them to surrender and stop tormenting me. If you hear a familiar voice, ignore it. If you get asked a question, don't answer it. If you feel someone touching you, do not flinch. This was an order. For fuck's sake, what have I let myself in for here? I thought to myself. The prayers began and I had to stare at the fire. All of a sudden, I heard my mother asking me to stop and come back home. It was my mother's voice. The tone, everything about that voice said it was my mother. But I remembered I needed to ignore it. So I looked back down to... Someone slapped me on the back of my head. I instinctively raised my arm, but the other priest grabbed it and put it down. I looked at him and he motioned to me to look at the fire. I was now shaking. I was that scared. Whatever was in that room was vicious. It wanted to do harm. All I could think about is being possessed. I didn't care about the slaps or the neck squeezes. This ritual was tortuous. I heard voices then swearing at me, pleading with me, laughing, hissing. All the while, both priests are chanting loudly and at pace. Then I could not hear anything. I looked at the priests and saw their mouths moving, but there was no sound. And in that silence was when I started to hear the sound of Payal. First behind me, then as if someone is shaking them by my ear. All of a sudden, someone grabbed me by the hair and pulled me back violently. My head was held back at 90 degrees for what seemed like an eternity. My eyes were now fixed on the ceiling where I could see white smoke whirling at pace. The second priest put his arms around me and held me tight. The moment he'd done this, all the sound of the chanting came back, but there was no hair pulling. The ritual had ended, and the priest asked for some water for all 3 of us. I was crying and shaking. He told me to clear my head, and when I was ready, he'd like to talk to me. I walked out of that room, and to be 100% honest, I just wanted to run. To get out of the temple, out of Varanasi, and out of India. I couldn't take any more. But then I thought I'd come so far I'd be a fool to give up now. So I stayed and went back into the room to talk to the priest. He told me there are many spirits that surround me, but there are 2, in particular, that we must banish. There is one of a young woman who is tormented and feels cheated, and there is another, a powerful and vengeful spirit that will not allow the young woman to be reborn. This older, more powerful spirit has complete control. He further explained that the final ritual will be to break the bond between the two spirits. Once this happens, the more powerful spirit will have to find another host or another spirit to control. Well, I just sat there numb. They left me in the room and said I could stay the night in the temple if I didn't want to go back to the hotel. But I went back to the hotel. I'd seen and witnessed so many things, what more could possibly happen? At worst, it will be a repeat of last night. I'll take my chances in the hotel room. Well, that night, nothing happened. I didn't want to fall asleep, but fatigue set in and I dozed off. The next day, I returned to the temple. And this time, there are 3 priests, including MIW, and a holy man. It was explained to me that this holy man would communicate directly with the strong spirit and try to break the bond between the two spirits. It was explained to me that the other 2 priests will sit on either side of me, but slightly behind. Their role is to protect me. And so, with everyone in place, the fire was lit. As the fire got strong, they all began chanting. Nothing happened for the first 10 or 15 minutes, but then the door flew open, and a strong rush of wind came in. I could hear female voices behind me, stamping of feet, thuds on walls. The steel drinking glasses were thrown to the ground, and the rice and utensils that were all neatly laid out went flying across the floor. I felt the 2 priests who were sitting behind me get closer, and I leant into them. One of them put his hand on my shoulder, which I found comforting, but when I looked around, his hands were joined together, praying. Who the hell's hand is on my shoulder? It then moved from my shoulder, went up my neck, and I felt this burning sensation. I closed my eyes and prayed. I said all the prayers I knew. The chanting got louder, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the holy man, sat cross-legged across from me. He was shaking, and his eyes were rolled up to show their whites. MIW told me to stand up. I couldn't. I was frozen to the spot. One of the priests helped me up, and we started to walk around the fire. Every time I walked past the holy man, he'd look up and snarl at me. I was going to faint. I felt my knees and senses going. The other priest got up, and together both priests helped me as I walked around the fire 7 times. After the 7th time, they sat me down and I fell asleep. I say asleep. I may have fainted, I'm not sure. But when I awoke, the priests and the holy man were sat there talking and drinking tea. MIW smiled and asked me to join them. How long was I sleeping? I asked. About an hour, he said. I asked for some water and sat against the wall, having no idea what had or had not happened. It's done, he said. You can go back to the GAT and donate some money. It will also be appreciated if you give this man, the holy man, a small donation. I reached into my bag, opened my wallet, and pulled out all of the notes I had, and I gave them to him. He thanked me and gave me a small ring. He told me to keep this with me at all times. At first I was reluctant to take it, but the MIW told me to take it. It's your protection, he said. MIW then told me to go back to my village and perform the ritual we carry out on the 12th or 13th day after someone dies. I looked at him and said, Is that it? Is this all finished? Yes, he said. I've done all I can to end this for you. But I needed answers. There were still too many unknowns. I don't have those answers, he said. I have an idea of what could have happened, but it's only my view. What I do know is that one spirit is now free. I don't know what's happened to the powerful spirit. but it no longer has any control. I thanked him, and we went back to the hotel. It was late evening, and I was shattered, so I didn't take the train back to my village. I returned to the hotel and started packing my clothes. After a shower, I had a bite to eat, and I got into bed. I felt really good. There was no fear, no apprehensions. I felt good, and I had a spring in my step. I contacted Amar and Dadaji, relaying my story to them, and I said, I'll be returning back to the village tomorrow. Amar said he'd come and sit with me during the ritual. I went to bed, and I wanted the morning to come early so I can leave. That night, I was woken by a gentle stroking on my head. It was really gentle. I looked around, and I couldn't see anyone. As soon as I closed my eyes, the stroking would start. So I kept my eyes closed. Even I can't understand this. I actually liked it. It was warm. It was soothing. I could feel someone's nails rub my scalp, again, very gently. Then something unbelievable happened. I saw her face. It was not next to me nor in front of me, but I could see her, with her head half covered by a red sari, with my eyes closed. There was no expression on her face. I wasn't scared. I just stared at her, and she stared at me. I must have fallen asleep because when I opened my eyes, it was now morning. Now, I am convinced I was awake when all of that happened. But I know it could have been a dream too. Everyone listening will make their own judgment, and that's cool with me. For the record, I will maintain I was not asleep when I saw her face. After donating money to pay for 3 funerals, I returned back to my village, and Dadaji had already made arrangements for the ritual. The priest was ready, as was Amar. The ceremony was held at the old house ruins. The priest asked me to lead and Amar to support. The ceremony itself lasted around 3 hours, and when done, it was done. Everything was done. The end. I was elated. I had no doubts, as I believe in my faith. I strongly believe in all these rituals and ceremonies. That night, we all sat out in the courtyard, and Dadaji rolled out the family tree, and he wrote down the name of this young woman who was being tormented for over 250 years. I welled up, and even Amar had a tear as her name was written. This was the closure I had hoped for. She finally had a place, her rightful place in our family history. Before flying back, I went back to the old house. I sat outside and reflected on everything. I wanted to go inside, but decided it's best not to. Whatever resides there deserves to be left alone, so that's exactly what I did. Like last time, I left all my clothes behind, deleted my phone, and all I brought back was myself, my memories, and the ring that was given to me. Has she come back to my dreams? No. Do I still hear sounds? No. Do I believe deep, deep in my heart this story has truly ended? Yes. It is the end. I have done everything I possibly could do. If she or anything else reappears, I will let it be. As I said, I have done everything possible. I know there are things that are still unknown, and I've created a theory in my head so they don't remain unknown. I've done this for my own well-being. I need to shut down and I need to move on. Thank you, Kevin, for giving me this space to share. I know many will believe me and many will not. I don't feel I have anything to prove to anyone. The only thing I had to prove is that I cared for this woman, my relative, to gain her rightful place in my family's history. Yes, she tormented me. She terrified me. But it was worth going through all I went through, because I'm now content knowing her soul is finally at peace. Kinar. Well, Kinar, thank you so much for concluding your trilogy, if you will, albeit all one experience. And I still stand by the fact your first experience, or should I say, your first episode, our first installment of this overall experience, still sticks with me to this day. So I wish you nothing but the best, and I sincerely thank you for providing an update and a conclusion to your experience. Don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience of any length that you wish to share, email it across to contact@thedarkparanormal.com. And of course, I'll speak to you next on Monday for the first of our October doubling up of minisodes. So until then, stay safe, take care, and remember, when you're discussing the paranormal, always try and leave some of your disbelief at the door. And I'll speak to you next time, right here on the Dark Paranormal.